Hello and welcome for joining us. This is a Google Hangout interview with Meredith Cicerchia of Lingually, a language learning website. We're also joined by Paulino. I'll let Paulino introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Paulino Brenner. I'm a Spanish educator and I'm also social media manager. I'm here helping Noah with this interview. We are live, so if you're watching us, feel free to join us with your questions. On YouTube, you can leave a comment and we'll do our best to answer your questions live. And if you follow us on Twitter, you can use the hashtag Lingually, no dots, just hashtag lingually, and we'll also do our best to answer your questions during the interview.
Thank you so much, Paulino, for being here and helping us out with the technology aspect, making sure I don't mess anything up too bad. Without further ado, here is Meredith. Meredith, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Now, first things first, for anybody who's not yet familiar with Lingually, what exactly is Lingually?
Lingually is a language learning tool. It comes in many forms, but it's a system that allows you to learn vocabulary through context and expand your vocabulary using all authentic content. It's fueled by big data, and there are many ways that you can learn vocabulary. We have a browser extension so you can surf the web in a foreign language, and when you see a word you don't know, you double click on it instead of just forgetting it or translating the whole page and learning nothing. It sends it to a collected word list. In our mobile apps, you can be at the grocery store, see strawberry, and say, I don't know what strawberry is in Danish. You look it up, and it adds it to your collected word list. You can also be on our web app and have an article suggestion. You see a word you don't know, you double click, it adds it to your word list. So it's a way to expand your vocabulary and learn through context, because we provide articles, foreign language newspaper articles that are new and current and are from the papers. We stream them, and you double click on words that you don't know as you read them, and it just becomes a learning loop for you.
And so, when you talk about authentic resources, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we because you can learn by surfing anywhere on the web. You could be inside an actual email someone sent you, so you could be at work, or you could be with a pen pal, or you could just be surfing on a museum's website or on a French newspaper's website. You see a word you don't know, you double click. You get the definition. But the newspapers and the content that we use, we actually just collect RSS feeds. So we look at sources that have good content, that publish often, that have different topics, and it provides sort of a wide range of material, and we index them. So basically, we have a really scalable solution because we can add new languages quite readily, as long as we have a dictionary and an index for that language. You can then just any word. I'll tell you later how we choose which articles you see and how we fill your feed. But that's a little bit more about what's going on under the hood.
So, with these authentic resources, people interested in learning languages aren't seeing resources intended for language learners, but rather authentic texts that are actually being used by actual language speakers.
Yeah, these are all for native speakers, mostly by native speakers. There is so much content available on the web. It seems silly to produce it, particularly when you can create digital immersion. It's in what happens when if you were just surfing the web, you might find yourself in an article that's way over your head. The reading level, all the vocabulary words would be unknown, and that's really cognitively overloading for a language learner. I'm an applied linguist, and the research says that you need 80 to 90% of the words in every sentence in order to guess from context at the missing words. And when you guess at a word before, instead of just being handed the definition, you have a much better chance of retaining it. I think it's actually 70% better chance of retaining it. So the idea of learning from context, and then how do you ensure that the articles that you're being given are actually at your level? And we don't use levels. We don't use the CEFR scale or the ILR scale. We don't say you're a beginner and intermediate. We simply map your vocabulary. We map your working vocabulary, and we find articles that contain as close as possible to a 90 to 10% ratio of known to unknown words. So we see all these words you're collecting, and as you're clicking on words and looking them up, we're measuring which words you don't click on as well. And we're looking, we have a practice game inside the app. So we're looking at how well you know the words you're actively studying. And then we're taking a guess. We're constantly taking a guess at what you might know, what you do and don't know in the language. We have an index of every word in the language you're learning. And we use that to sort of map your working vocabulary at every given moment. Every time you take an action on the platform, it changes your map because you have new words activated. And then we look in our index of content that's current new content. It's constantly being updated, and we look for articles that fit your profile. So every learner will get a different set of articles in their feed based on the words they're learning, the most recent words they've learned, and their actual working vocabulary.
So with Lingui's ability to provide language learners with authentic texts that are so closely linked to just where they are in their own readiness, how are you seeing some K through 12 language teachers use Lingually as a supplement to their own teaching?
Well, we've heard some teachers are giving all of their students a base set of vocabulary, 10 words to put into the system, and then watching how they diverge, because you may give the same 10 words to all of your students, but everyone's working vocabulary is different based on words that are meaningful to them in their native language, words they already know in the second language. Everyone will have a different understanding of those 10 words, and you'll see right away how they change and how they move. And then as they go into, they'll all start off with, maybe if they're brand new users, with the same feed, but within a minute their profile will change as they go through an article, because they will all click on different words. They'll choose different words to look up based on what they do and don't know, and you'll see that their feeds just alter and change. And it's a nice way to have all of your students bringing new language in and getting a different experience, but a shared experience, because they're based on the same initial set of words.
That's really interesting. So are most teachers doing this, or I shouldn't say most, are you seeing a mix of how teachers are doing as far as class time, whether it's some in-class activity and out-of-class activity, something done in learning stations, you rotate to your Lingually station and have that time, or when it's being done in the schoolhouse, actually whole groups sitting down with Lingually and having a set amount of time they're working with it?
I think that there's a mix. I know there are a few classes that we're looking at right now close to our home office, where teachers are sort of dedicating, I think, one class a week to in class, looking at the articles and having it be more of a group activity, but then sort of saying, I want you to collect 10 words a night for homework, and then I want everyone to read 3 articles that contain the words that you're learning, choose one to bring into class. Present it, talk about it, explain it to the rest of the class. And you can also see, which is helpful for teachers, if you give the same set of 10 vocabulary words, if it's a theme, if you're in a sort of a lower level, that's one thing, but as you go into intermediate stages, the words can appear in a myriad of articles, so you'll find that the same 10 words that start everyone off, one student may say, I'd like to look at the technology version of my feed, I'd like to look at the science, or I'd rather prefer food or entertainment, and you have the same set of 10 words and where they appear in completely different media, that's still a feed customized to the individual. So you help teachers basically help their students find things that are interesting and that are right at their level. And when you're reading something that's right at your level, it's very it's fluid, it's smooth. You learn new words without realizing it, and it's a really positive experience. So it helps with motivation, and it helps students really stay engaged, because they can go read about sports if they prefer sports, or they can stick with. We even have psychology as a category. So.
That personalization aspect is really cool. For anyone who's just now joining us, I'm Noah Geisel at Senor G on Twitter. Paulino Brenner is with us, and we are interviewing Meredith Cicerchia of Lingually. And Meredith, you teased out earlier this idea of what's going on under the hood with Lingually, and you kind of hinted a little bit about how you're able to map appropriate level content to language learners. And so I wanted to see if you could speak a little bit more about what's going on under the hood. And for anyone joining us live, you can tweet at us with hashtag Lingually for your questions for Meredith, and we'll get those on live on the air. So Meredith, talk to us about what's going on under the hood.
Right. So when you start using Lingually, you need to get into the learning loop. So you either can look up 5 words that are meaningful to you and say, I want to learn these words, or you can we have word packs that can start you off. You need some words to create a feed of articles that contain those words. We don't know much about you. All we know is that those are 5 or 10 words that you're actively studying. But then we have an index of every word in the language that you're learning. And from that moment that you enter the first article that contains one of those words that you're starting with, we watch everything you do. We watch which words you double click on. We watch how long you spend and short portions of the page. We're doing everything we can to figure out how well you know the words there, and then understand that maybe you clicked on red and you clicked on yellow and you saw green 3 times in articles last week and you didn't click on green. So our system thinks you might know green, and we assign everything a different value. So we're not just saying you do or you don't. We're taking a really nuanced view of what your working vocabulary is, what your footprint is. And that's constantly changing depending on what you've been exposed to, what you've seen. And then when you factor in that we have a web extension, so you can also be surfing the web and you may encounter words, and we're also looking there to see what you're interacting with and what you're looking up. So we're really, it's almost like in an immersion setting, where you're walking around, you never know which words you're going to learn. You never know when students go study abroad, they come back with vocabulary that's just really meaningful to them, and they encountered maybe 4 or 5 times just a strange word. Échantillon was my one of these words that I learned when I was studying abroad in France. I was on an internship. It's a very strange word to learn. Sample, it means, and I was working in a winery, and so it came up all the time, and I had to learn it immediately. But that's the same thing that happens to you when you surf and when you read articles. If you are reading in a certain genre, you encounter the same kinds of words over and over again. And what we're doing is we're optimizing the whole situation. So you do see those words again, and then we find you words that are related to those words because we're pulling articles that contain them. So we're introducing you to sort of collocates and the maybe even genre families around those and schematic vocabulary families, but all via authentic content, all via things that are real and interesting and for native speakers.
That's really fascinating stuff, and I think that kind of gets at what you talked about at the beginning of our interview when you mentioned big data.
Yeah, and this is part of what we're doing. So we're not just looking at what you're looking up, but we also have a practice game inside of our system, and it's a smart spaced repetition. So it's an algorithm that optimizes so that you can maintain your vocabulary. It prioritizes things that you've most recently learned. When you first see a word, when you first learn a word or meet a word, you need to see it again within 72 hours in order to not forget it, right? And then depending on how well you knew it and how well you recognized it in the practice game, the interval at which you next need to see it in order for it to stay active is different, and then it's different for every learner depending on their profile and what they are clicking in or not clicking on. So we factor all that into this practice game to keep your vocabulary active and keep it all sort of on par. And there's also a sort of we have a flash system so that we also can see that you're reviewing certain words or looking at them more often. So we're using all of this information to sort of optimize your experience inside authentic content. And this was originally based on our founder did a project where he actually wrote software to catalog proteins in the human genome, and then spent 2 years adapting this for language. So the technology behind it was based on big data sets and how to process them and how to look through them and how to identify patterns. And so this is sort of the basis of Lingually is that technology foundation. It's doing something that teachers try to do, and that we say, okay, these are the words my students are learning. I'm going to find content that contains them, but it's actually allowing you to be really exact with that, because you can take every student has a different profile, and it's impossible for you to know that as a teacher, right? You can guess, but it would take you a long time to pick a different article out for every student in the class, and Lingua allows you to do that. And then also it contains all the words that a student's learned from start to finish, so they can start at any point in their interlanguage continuum, right? You can be anywhere. You don't have to be an advanced one or an advanced two or an advanced three. It doesn't, or an intermediate or a beginner. You start with what words you know. So it allows everybody to kind of just jump right in and start with optimized learning.
And so, in the way you describe it there, with just not just your level of readiness, but your level of interest, do you hear people comparing Lingui at all to a Pandora or Spotify for language learning?
We haven't, but there is this sort of idea of it being like a feed, because we're presenting all of this content that's of interest to you, and it contains words that are in your working vocabulary. And then there's this idea of, if it's a feed, it's almost like a Facebook for language learners, because it's just constantly showing you things that you're interested in, and it right now we just do articles, but the potential things that could be included in the feed are almost unlimited. We could index the scripts for videos. We could have like foreign language advertisements, so you can see your Coca-Cola slogan in Arabic. I mean, there's so many things that you can do with a feed that I think it lends itself more to that experience, of that immersion experience. You're learning without realizing you're learning. We're giving you the same content over and over again in different forms, so that you learn it, because the more exposure, the more you retain.
That sounds like you all have some really exciting plans for where Lingui will go in the future. Sticking with this topic, though, of the big data for another minute, I'm wondering what Lingui is learning about how people learn as you look at the data not on an individual level, but across whole groups of learners.
Yeah, so there's a lot that can be that we can mine from this data. We haven't started. Well, it's the tip of the iceberg, because there is so much of it to go through. But you could look at which words people tend to learn first, because you have frequencies as well, right? So the 1,000 most frequent words that appear. You can then look at the different genres and to see what are the most frequent within sports or technology, and how people actually fit within those frequencies. It should be, if they're using our system, if our system is working correctly. So you can learn about which words people start to learn first, and then if you know someone's working vocabulary, you can also see how much overlap there is, and we also you can see if they're filling in a schema or if they're missing things out. You can look at right now we optimize our system for vocabulary, so we're saying find people articles that have 80 to 90% known words, but we could also say find people examples of a certain, because we have data on how people are exposed to a certain structure, and what they click on within that structure and what they do with it. Do they try to pick apart chunks of language, or do they just leave them? I can't even begin to say how much we could learn from the data that we're collecting.
So my mind just goes to some pretty exciting places where Lingui can not just take the 1,000 most common words, but can inform the language teaching community of, according to your data, which of those 1,000 are the most easily accessed or quickest to learn for language learners in any given language that people are learning with Lingui.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can also look and see how often do they need to be seen before they're learned. I mean, we're not doing assessment right now beyond a practice game, but that's a potential addition always, right? If you were to do a research project around this, you would want to know how people are scoring on those words over time that they've learned with Lingui, because when you expend an extra amount of cognitive energy in trying to trying to understand a word, read it and you have to guess at what it means, or you have to think about it, even if you get it wrong, you're digging the hole a little deeper for the memory. And so we could also measure retention rates against control groups and see what happens when it's meaningful and it's encountered in a meaningful setting around other words, and it's within these right ratios, and it's not just handed to you and deliberately learned. It goes, I mean, you could go back and do more sort of acquisition learning research for teachers, how to present vocabulary, how to present material, how much should be in lists, and what are optimal. How many words can a student handle a day? How many words? How much vocabulary should we be expecting them to learn? There's so much that you could do with this data.
So potentially, it's not so much what are the limits of what we can learn, but what are the limits of our imagination in asking questions about what we can learn.
And manipulating the data set and moving it around, yeah.
And then going back to that kind of under the hood aspect you brought up there, that you can trial things in control groups. Can you kind of just describe for people who are watching this what that might look like?
We haven't started this yet, but as one of the founders is from Stanford, cognitive psychology and psychology of language learning, and my background is from Oxford, and I'm from vocabulary acquisition. To look at the effects of a lingual intervention on students' learning. You could look at how important learning from context is versus just presenting vocabulary. That's an easy one. And then there you would measure how well students know the words that are found within lingually or that they've been presented with. But you could also then look at breadth of vocabulary. So when you're learning, the breadth and depth are equally important. So building out how many words a student knows and then how well they know each individual word. And you could also do recall as well, timing for how fast people recognize a word, if it's something that they've learned through lingually because they're used to being presented that word over and over again. How often one needs to see that word in order for it to be in faster recall. You would just simply provide students with one set of words, and they would learn it deliberately, and then you have them acquire the words and really meet them in context and pick up on them. We obviously have, I think there's an interesting, there's a huge debate, right? And it goes back to Krashen, and there's a lot of indecision over learning and acquisition, and if all of this is really a good idea. But with Lingually, you're setting immersion, you're setting the scene for acquisition, the I+1, right? You have this content that is tailored to each visual and contains 80% to 90% words they know, but you're also providing them with because you have a dictionary right there. And so if you can't guess, or if you need to confirm your guess, you can double. There's two things going on. You can look at how often people, you could even ask, like, where you test, if people didn't actually clicked on it, you could add a function to the program to see if they just paused on it versus actually double clicked and deciding to define that word. And then there's also, there's just so many things that you can do. It's an exciting technology. If you look at our web app, you have your vocabulary list on the right, and then you have your content in the center. So you can look at how important it is to have vocabulary present, and if the definition is hidden, if just the word alone is enough. Maybe you have the word and a picture to the right. You could do all sorts of experiments there. There's a lot that can be done.
Yeah, the research is a really exciting component. I know as a language teacher, and I think a lot of language teachers who stumble on this interview will get kind of excited about the potential there for what Lingually learns and what it can learn. And I'm curious just if Lingually is open to language teachers reaching out to say, hey, are you guys learning about this issue, as far as how students are learning, and how receptive Lingually is to those inquiries, and how receptive Lingually is to sharing what you learn with the greater language teaching community. And if the answer to the latter is yes, then what the thinking is right now for how you'll be sharing that learning and what you can glean from the mining of the data.
I think one of the things that's important is that we're very open to any kind of questions, comments. We'd love to hear from you. Please email me directly. It's Meredith at lingually, lingua.ly for an email address. But we're building out an app, right? And we have to survive as well. So right now we're building Lingually on different platforms, and adding more browser extensions, and we just put out a new iOS app for iOS 8, and we've got an Android app, and we're constantly optimizing and adding more languages as well. So we have this huge data set, and we have someone who's doing his PhD in linguistics right now, working with us, and we're thinking about this. We're looking at it and saying, how do we move the data around? But we haven't quite gotten to that step yet. We're right on the edge of it. So we'd love your questions, because we only answer them when we can.
I know that I, for one, am really excited to hear your openness and the fact that you have somebody on site who's actually doing their PhD in this, and I can only imagine that we're going to see some not just amazing data, but great analysis of that data, and it'll be, I'm sure, shared in really public ways. That's very exciting. Just a final question to close, Meredith, is as you think into the future of Lingually down the road, assuming you're going to be just this great successful app, 18 months and even 5 years, 10, 20 years down the road, what's the vision for Lingually?
Well, one of the most important things is to keep the base technology free. That's something that we definitely want to do. We're not creating content, so we have the luxury of doing that. We're not paying people to sit around and put together courses. Every student is designing their own, in a sense, by choosing which words to learn, and we're indexing from existing online media. So we're actually helping we're helping French papers get more views from American surfers. So in a sense, the business model is quite nice for the user, because we don't have to worry about putting a cost to it down the line. But we're also thinking about creating a more dynamic Lingually feed, and of all the things that you can do with a tool like this. There are so many uses, so I can't really get too much of our plans, because we are a startup and we have competition. But I can say that we've got exciting things on the horizon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Paulino just put up your email and website for anybody who's watching us live. Feel free to get a hold of Meredith with any follow-up questions. And Meredith, I just want to conclude by thanking you so much for being here with us and sharing all the exciting news at Lingually with us.
Thank you for having me. This is great. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. And thank you to anybody who's joined in and who finds this on YouTube. You can feel free to reach out with any follow-up questions to me as well at Senor G on Twitter. And also feel free to let me know any other interviews you'd like to see in the future. And a final huge thank you to Paulino for helping us out with all the tech aspects tonight.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. And there we have the website and the email if people want to get in touch with Meredith.
Thank you very much, Paulino. And again, Meredith, thank you for being with us. And good night, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Good night.